Hey everyone, I wanted to make a quick video to run through the word problems in homework 4 that have to do with domain and range. These can be kind of confusing, so I just kind of wanted to run through a couple of them with you. Okay, so our first example here, we have the fuel tank of an airplane can hold up to 300 gallons of fuel. W is the total weight of the airplane in pounds. F is the total amount of fuel in its tank in gallons. Our function is W equals 6F plus 4,000. That gives W as a function of F. We need to find the domain and the range of the function W. Let's remember what domain and range mean. So domain answers the question, what can X be? And the range answers the question, what can Y be? Now, the thing is, in the formula that we don't have X and Y. We've got W and F. And so we need to figure out which one is X and which one is Y. So, W equals 6F plus 4,000 gives W as a function of F. Anytime you see the wording as a function of F, that variable that comes at the end, that's your X value. That's what that wording means. And typically, Y is the variable that's by itself here. We typically write Y equals. So W is going to be our Y value, and F is going to be our X value here. So really, domain here is going to answer the question, what can F be? Because F is the variable that's standing in for X. And our range is going to answer the question, what can W be? Because W is the variable that's standing in for our Y. Okay, so let's think about this. Domain, what can F be? Let's remember what F is. F is the total amount of fuel in its tank in gallons. So F is an amount of fuel in gallons. And we actually have some more information about that. The fuel tank of the airplane can hold up to 300 gallons of fuel. So that means the values that F can take on, it can have any amount of fuel between 0, an empty tank, and 300 gallons, a full tank. Now, can we have any number between 0 and 300, or can we only have whole numbers? Like, can we only have 1, 2, 3, 4 gallons, or can we have 0 gallons? Can we have half a gallon? Can we have 0.01 gallons? We can absolutely have fractions of gallons of fuel in an airplane. That makes sense. So the domain, the values that F can take on, is going to be any number between 0 and 300. We can write that in interval notation as the interval from 0 to 300. We can write it like that. So now, what can our range be? Again, range is what can W be? So let's see. W is the weight of the airplane in pounds. Now, the hard thing about this is that we aren't specifically told what the weight of the airplane can be. But the weight of the airplane, W, depends on F. Depending on how much fuel is in the airplane, that determines how much it weighs. So we need to do some thinking here to figure out what the weight can be when we have between 0 and 300 gallons of fuel in our airplane. So let's just start with the endpoints and figure out how much the plane weighs when it's empty and how much the plane weighs when it's full. That will kind of help us figure out what the range of the weight can be. So if we have 0 gallons in our fuel tank, then F is 0. And in that case, W is going to be 6 times 0 plus 4,000. I'm just plugging in f equals 0 into our function up here. And so when we have 0 gallons of fuel in the tank, the weight is 4,000 pounds. Okay, and then how much does it weigh when it's full? Well, we're going to plug in 300 gallons and we'll see how much we weigh. Okay, so if we have 6 times 300, that's going to be 1,800 plus 4,000, that's going to give us 5,800 pounds. So when it's empty, it weighs 4,000. When it's full, it weighs 5,800. And because our F value, can take on any number between 0 and 300, that means our Y value can take on any number between 4,000 and 5,800. We can get anything in between here. So the range is going to be any real numbers between 4,000 and 5,800 pounds. We could also write that as an interval this way. This interval also means any real number between 4,000 and 5,800. So you can really write your domain and range either way here. Okay, let's try one more of these to show you a difference that can happen. So if you have the printed notes, this one isn't in the printed notes. I just kind of popped in some screenshots from Alex to show you how this can be different. Okay, so a small publishing company is planning to publish a new book. C is the total cost of publishing the book, and N is the number of copies of the book produced. For the first printing, the company can produce up to 300 copies of the book, and C equals 25N plus 800 gives C as a function of N. And again, we need to find the domain and the range. Okay, so the domain is what can X be, the range is what can Y be. So we have to figure out in our function, what is X and what is Y. Because we have C as a function of N, that means N is our X variable, and C is over here by itself, which means it's going to be our Y variable, Y equals. So C is the variable for our Y value, and N is the variable for our X value here. So the domain is going to answer the question, what can N be? Because N is our X variable here. So what can N be? Well, that's gonna depend on what N is. Let's figure out what N is. N is the number of copies of the book produced. So it's the number of copies of the book we make. So that's going to be this one. And how many of these can we do? We have some information about that. The company can produce up to 300 copies of the book. So we are going to be between 0 and 300 here. Now the question here is, can we have fractions? Do fractions make sense? Can we have half a book? Can we have a quarter of a book? Can we have 0.01 books? Not when we're printing them. We wouldn't print 0.01 of a book. You're going to print a whole book or none at all, right? So here we aren't going to have any real number between 0 and 300. We're only going to have whole numbers between 0 and 300. So when you're answering this question, you will click on this down arrow and you will get this drop down menu here. And so for our domain, again, this is going to be the number of copies that we're producing. And it can be anything between 0 and 300, but only the whole numbers, because half a book doesn't make sense in this context. And so now, instead of all of the real numbers, we're just getting the whole numbers between 0 and 300. Okay, so that's domain. Now we just have to figure out the range. And again, the range is what can y be? And our y variable here is c. C is the variable that's standing in for y. So what is c again? Here, C is the total cost of publishing the book. C is the cost. Okay, so now what can the cost be when the number of copies is between 0 and 300? Again, we aren't given that information specifically. It's going to depend on how many books we produce. So C equals 25N plus 800. That's going to be, that's our function. I just grabbed it from here and copied it down so that we could kind of think about this. So our range is the cost, and we have to figure out which values this can take on when we're producing 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way up to 300 copies. So again, let's start with our endpoints and figure out what values that this can take on. So let's say we don't make any books. N equals 0. 25 times 0 plus 800. I'm plugging in N equals 0. I want to know what the lowest cost that we can have is. 0 times 25 is 0, plus 800 is 800. So if we don't make any books at all, it's going to cost us $800. Maybe that's just for the materials and the machinery and whatever else we need. And then we can produce up to 300 books. So what if we produce all 300 books? How much is this going to cost? Well, when I put that into my calculator, 25 times 300 plus 800, I get 8,300 out of my calculator. So that means if we produce 300 books, it's going to cost us $8,300. So we're going to get numbers between 800 and 8,300 out for our range. But the thing is, we aren't going to get every number between 800 and 8,300 because our domain isn't absolutely every fraction between 0 and 300. So to figure out exactly which numbers are going to come out, I'm going to plug in a couple more values here. So we already know what happens when we plug 0 in. Let's plug 1 in. What if we produce one book? Sorry, plus 800. If we produce one book, 1 times 25 is 25, plus 800 is 825. And then what if we produce two books? Well, we are going to have 50 plus 800, that's 850. So do you see how we're not getting every number between 800 and 8,300? We're only increasing by $25 each time. So we'll get all of the numbers between 800 and 8,300 that are multiples of 25. And so when we come down here to choosing the range from the drop-down menu, you'll notice that here is the correct answer. We're going to get everything between 800 and 8,300 that are steps of 25. And that's just because when we start plugging in our domain elements, we aren't going to get every number. We're just going to get steps of 25 because each additional book is going to cost us 25 bucks to make. Okay, so hopefully this helps you with this problem type. It's just going to be a little confusing because you're going to have to ask yourself, first figure out what your x variable is and what your y variable is. And then once you figure out your values or like which the values that your x variable can be between, ask yourself, can it be any real number between them? Any fraction at all? Does that make sense? Or does it have to be a whole number to make sense in your context with what that variable represents? And that's really going to help you answer this question. I hope that helps. Have a great day, and I will see you in class on Monday.